Today we're going to increase our knowledge about exposure and delve deep into the depths of ISO. We're going to get started right now. Welcome back to my channel on macro photography. If you love learning all about macro photography and all the technical little details, please remember to like and subscribe and click that bell button so you don't miss a single episode. Today we're going to continue the learning on exposure when it comes to macro photography. A lot of the concepts that we deal with in macro photography work in all areas of photography when it deals with properly exposing your subject. Macro creates some more interesting challenges though. The difference between light and shadow tends to be greater when you get up close with a subject versus being outside, being a sports photographer, being a wedding photographer. There's a lot of things that you can do with a little bit easier there than you can when you're going into the macro world. And that's true whether you are doing outdoor macro of insects and flowers or whatever you find, or studio macro, where you have a little more control over your sources of light and your subject matter. Just for a bit of review, there are 3 settings on your camera that you can change to properly expose your image. They are aperture, shutter speed, and ISO. ISO is really light sensitivity, and this dates back a little bit to the film days. Yes, I really am that old. When you bought film for your SLR camera back in the 80s and 70s and so on and so forth, it had a speed rating. It could be ISO 100, ISO 200, ISO 400, ISO 800, and so on and so forth. People said that you used fast film if you used ISO 800, for example. But really, it's not the fact that the film itself is fast. What it is that the film is more sensitive to the available light. A lot of people think that you have to use high ISO settings in low light conditions, say a concert, or you're taking a picture of the night sky, or something along those lines. That's not actually true. A sports photographer will tell you that they might use ISO 800 outside in the bright sun in order to get a good exposed image. The reason being is they use a really fast shutter speed to stop that action. And if you use really fast shutter speed with low ISO, your image is going to be much darker and not correctly exposed. Additionally, back in the film days, you really only had one shot at it. That little bit of film was all you had. We don't have the digital cards and stuff like that that we have today. We didn't look at the back of our camera to see if we got the shot. We have a lot of advancements today that help us become a little bit better because we can try again in the exact same scenario and lighting conditions and time that you wouldn't be able to do if you were using a film. For example, if you shot an event back in the film days and you messed it up, you got blurry images, they're overexposed, underexposed, you couldn't go back to that event. That event is done. But with the advent of digital photography and memory cards and so on and so forth, and the ability to look very quickly at the back of our camera and see if we got a good image, that all changes because we can just try again in the next few seconds if it didn't work. So ISO is how sensitive your sensor is to the available light. And it doesn't really matter the kind of light source you use. It could be daylight. It could be some sort of artificial light, such as a light bulb, a flashlight, torch if you're in the UK, candle, speed light, whatever. It doesn't actually matter. But what does matter is the less light you have, you are going to need a higher ISO in order to expose your subject. So for today, I thought what I would do is I would take a page out of Lee Hall's book, and he has a great video on his page, and I'll link to that right here, on how he used one of these to get a really cool color image of a dandelion glock and water drop. So I'm going to duplicate that process and explain ISO while I'm doing it. So let's get to it right over here. So here we are in my kitchen, and I've got this set up just ad hoc on my kitchen table. I'm not really bothering to use my macro lighting frame for this shot because, no, it's not really necessary. I'm not really adding any additional lights or anything like that to the frame. But if you want to learn about my macro lighting frame, click this link right up here and you can find some more detail on it. So what I've got is our little light table, and the LEDs in the table rotate between red, green, and blue on an ongoing basis. They don't actually stop. One thing that is a little unfortunate about this particular device is you can't stop the LED rotation or set it to a specific color, because that would be super cool. So I might do another video with a device that can actually, where you can set a particular color in the LEDs, and that might be really, really neat. I've turned off my overhead lights, so there's virtually zero ambient light. Got a little bit from my continuous light over here just so you see me. I've got a black background here, which I just picked up at a craft store, and I'm just leaning it against an old fish tank I found, which I might actually use for to keep a jumping spider in, hopefully at some point in the near future. I've got my camera set up on a very small little Manfrotto tripod. It's already pre-focused, so I'm not doing a lot of that on film, and the LEDs are already running. In addition, on top of my camera, I've got a remote shutter release and shutter release cable plugged in, so I can just take the shot and not worry too much about it. Now, as it happens, because we're dealing in such a minute space, the camera is really only seeing the LED lights. Even on the lowest ISO setting, which on my camera is ISO 100, some will go down to ISO 50. I actually get some very nice color along a couple of the strands of this salsify seed. But if I want more color, or I want to see more of the seed with the color, I'm going to have to increase the ISO. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to take several shots, and then I will display them here in the video one at a time and tell you what the settings are. And between each, I'm just going to change the settings on the camera. You might you might want to try and plan for this so that particular colors show, and that can be very difficult. I've also got a little spray bottle here. I'm just going to spray the seed a little bit and get some water droplets on it and see what that looks like, because I haven't done this yet with a salsify seed. And let's see what we can do. Now, my camera, being a Canon camera, has some unique ISO settings. So I'm starting at ISO 100. It'll go to ISO 125, 160, which is on the Canon cameras is called their natural ISO setting, where that particular light sensitivity works really well with the camera, and multiples of it tend to work very well. So an ISO 320 image will look better than an ISO 200 or 250 or even 400. So here we go. That's at ISO 100, and I'm just going to increase this. Unfortunately, I cannot do this on menu settings on my camera or anything like that. And I won't bore you with all the settings on this as we go up, but I will display them here at the end of the video just so you can see the effect. For the purposes of this video, I'm only going up to ISO 1600 because you can get the idea after the fact. I thought it'd be very interesting to try an auto ISO setting on my camera. So if I go to the ISO and I'm going to set it to A on the dial here. And if I take a look at that, it tells me that that is ISO 6400. And that is the result we get with that setting, which is actually kind of cool. The other settings in the camera I'm leaving exactly the same. I haven't changed my aperture, I haven't changed my shutter speed, no other setting changes at all in order to maintain consistency for this video. And it's a good experiment that you should actually try yourself. The problem, of course, as we increase the ISO, because of the light sensitivity issue, we tend to increase the noise level in the image as well. Now, in some cases, we can reduce that in other means. We might use Lightroom or Photoshop or Topaz or one of those things to try and reduce the noise. We might try and reduce noise in other ways. In this case, having a dedicated black background and only light coming from the rotating table here really minimizes the amount of noise, even at a super high ISO setting. So there you have it, ISO in a nutshell. Try this at home. Try it for yourself. See what kind of image results you get. And you will probably be very pleasantly surprised that you might need to use a higher or lower ISO setting than you have been in the exact same lighting conditions. Next week, we're going to address shutter speed and how that affects your macro photography. So until then, remember that in the macro world, we make little things a big deal. See you next time.